Huh, got a new email here. And it's from a Nigerian prince. All he needs is $100 grand to pay legal fees, and then as soon as he gets his money, I get $1 million.
The Nigerian prince. You've heard of him, right? A mysterious email lands in your inbox, promising you a fortune in exchange for a little help. For years, this has been a running joke.
You know what, Toby? When the son of the deposed king of Nigeria emails you directly asking for help, you help.
A punchline in Hollywood movies and shows.
Okay?
The Nigerian prince scam.
Next time I get an email from a Nigerian prince. But the guy's a Nigerian prince.
We trusted emails from a Nigerian prince.
But behind the jokes and the memes, there's a much bigger story. A global industry of deception, one that's bigger than the regular email scams. Remember when the name Hush Puppy made headlines across the world? He became the face of modern day 419 fraud, a symbol of just how big the Nigerian 419 game had become. But Hush Puppy's story is just one chapter in a much larger book. For decades, Nigeria has been infamous for its so-called Nigerian prince emails and elaborate 419 scams. How did Nigeria earn this infamous reputation? And how did this scheme, 419, evolve into one of the most notorious scam genres of our time? That story is about to get a lot deeper.
The culture of scamming people, that culture I think is in Nigeria, yes.
A lot of people think that 419 or advanced fee fraud started in Nigeria. While it's true that Nigerians took the scam to unprecedented levels, running it on a massive international scale, we did not invent it. The first recorded advanced fee fraud schemes actually came from Europe. Every time a new technology pops up, there are always people ready to exploit it for their own shady gains. Back in the 1840s, Britain rolled out its prepaid national postal service, along with the world's first postage stamp, the penny black. This was revolutionary. You could mail a letter to anyone, anywhere, and expect it to be delivered. Cue the con men in Spain. These crafty schemers got their hands on names and addresses through trade directories and began flooding Britain and its colonies, including Nigeria, with letters. They spun a sub-story about a rich man stuck in a torturous Spanish prison, pleading for help to cover his bill. The catch? He promised to share his hidden fortune with anyone who would send him some cash upfront to set him free. This scam, later known as the Spanish prisoner con, played out with countless variations, but the goal was always the same: to trick the recipient into sending an advance fee in the hope of a big reward. Sound familiar? It's an early precursor to what would eventually become known as 419. So how did 419 start in Nigeria? To understand how Nigeria became the capital of 419, we need to take a trip back to the colonial days. During the early to mid 20th century, when Nigeria was still a British colony, British officers and international expatriates filled most of the top and mid-level positions in both government and private enterprise. Despite this, Nigerians played a crucial role in administrative work, bookkeeping, and clerical duties, and so basic education was needed. Missionary schools were established across Nigeria, particularly in the south, teaching the fundamentals of learning, what we often refer to as the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic, or arithmetic. In these schools, it wasn't uncommon for mischievous schoolboys to write letters to their pen pals in England, boasting about their access to exotic African items like ivory and gold, or claiming to possess mystical powers. While we can't exactly trace the origins of 419 culture directly to these colonial schoolboys, their early experiences with writing for mischief highlight the development of a crafty mindset. More on that later. Graduating from a missionary school almost guaranteed a job in one of the colonial offices or industries. Only a handful pursued further education with a university degree, which was only obtainable abroad until the establishment of the University of Ibadan in 1948. Education was seen as the key to a better life, allowing individuals to climb the social ladder and assume significant roles in society. This became increasingly apparent in the years leading up to and following Nigeria's independence, where the educated elite guided the affairs of the new nation. Anyways, back to colonial Nigeria. The first recorded incident of a 419 scam in Nigeria dates back to 1920, and interestingly, it was carried out not by a Nigerian, but by a Ghanaian living in Nigeria. His name was P. Crentil. He wrote letters to contacts in Ghana, claiming he had magical powers that could change their lives if only they paid a fee. He signed his letters as P. Crentil, Prof of Wonders. Crentil was caught in 1921 and charged by the police on 3 counts under various sections of the criminal code, one of which was section 419. And that, my friend, was how one of Nigeria's most infamous exports was born and named.
This is one type of man who is joining the fighting forces of the empire, a farmer in the northern provinces who leaves the fields to become a soldier. Training with the Nigeria regiment, quickly turns a simple countryman into a first-class fighting unit, tough, courageous, and enduring.
During World War II and the subsequent years, wartime conditions drove up the price of basic goods as the British channeled most food supplies from Nigeria to support the war effort. This led to a surge in criminal activity. Faced with economic hardship, many Nigerians sought new ways to make money, often resorting to illicit means in response to the challenging circumstances. For instance, there were Wayuu tricksters who posed as agents of a New York currency firm, selling large amounts of black paper and a special chemical to gullible victims, claiming that the chemical could clean the money. This is now commonly known as the black money scam. Additionally, there are money doublers, often referred to as black boys in major markets, who claimed mystical powers to double clients' investments. However, these were mostly small-scale operations and had not yet ballooned into the phenomenon we recognize today.
If civil war comes, and I do think it is imminent, you're quite right, it will for us be the price of freedom.
7 years after Nigeria had gained its independence from Britain in 1960, the country was thrust into turmoil. The people in the eastern region broke away from Nigeria to their own nation, Biafra, due to marginalization and violence from other tribes. As the conflict unfolded, many Igbo people returned to their ancestral homes in the east, while a significant number fled the country, marking Nigeria's first Japa wave. It's estimated that around 100,000 Igbo people left seeking safety.
We shall never go back to Nigeria again. God's grace will surely emerge as a nation. And so, as far as this war continues, we'll fight to the last man.
The Civil War raged for 3 long years, concluding in 1970.
Hereby ceases to exist.
In its aftermath, the Nigerian government decided that every Igbo person who had up to 20 Nigerian pounds in any Nigerian bank before the war would receive 20 Nigerian pounds, regardless of their previous account balance. So it didn't matter if you had 1 million Nigerian pounds in your bank account before the war, you were given just 20. Talk about a rough start. This meant that every Igbo individual had to rebuild their lives from scratch, no matter their prior status.
That's true of some civil servants as well. Decree 46 makes it very likely that about 100 of them, men like Cyprian Ekwenzi, will not get their jobs back. Mr. Ekwenzi, I suppose you're a classic example of how are the mighty fallen. You were Director of Information for the federal government and for Biafra, and now here you are selling plastic bottles around the country. What's it been like for you?
Well, I don't regard myself as an example of the mighty fallen, if that's the classification. The real thing is that at the end of the war, everybody started from scratch, and nothing was too menial for anyone to do in order to raise the most difficult commodity to find at the moment, which is money. And it takes a certain amount of courage to be able to do what people do not expect you to do. And I think I've proved the point. I have proved that I can do anything. And many people regard me as an example of the Igbo man who can do anything in any circumstance to fight against any desperate odds.
With no help on the horizon, making money became a matter of survival. The 70s also witnessed Nigeria's economy booming thanks to the oil industry, which brought a substantial influx of cash into the country. The government utilized this wealth to build educational institutions at every level, from the universal primary education program that allowed all Nigerian children to attend primary school for free, to the establishment of unity schools across all states to promote national unity as part of its post-war reconciliation efforts. The government was on a mission to educate the masses. In fact, 8 new universities were built during this decade. On the surface, this sounded great, but there was a significant downside. Earlier, we talked about how education was regarded as the gateway to a better life in Nigeria during the colonial era. This belief shaped an entire generation of Nigerians, instilling the idea that academic achievement would lead to financial freedom. However, upon graduation, many faced the stark reality of unemployment, with no government support to cushion their fall.
But as soon as you give education to these people, you bring them to the cities, you give them education. Once they are in the boarding institutions, you give them the kind of food, which is different from what they were used to while they were living in the villages and so forth and so on. You are naturally, doing everything to attract them to leave their old surroundings and come and seek a new life, in the cities. Most of the new industrial developments have taken place in the big cities. So there are no job opportunities in the villages. After you've completed your education, you cannot go to the village, and practice the kind of peasant farming, what your father has been doing. So you have to stay in the city and find a job to do.
For the rural migrant, the highest paying jobs are to be found in industry. It's a vicious cycle. The cities attract investment and therefore industry. To service industry, governments spend an enormous portion of their revenue in the cities. The countryside is drained of development resources, and therefore people flock to the cities in search of employment. The result is massive unemployment and a call for more industrialization to meet the demand for jobs.
For those with resources, the only option after witnessing rampant unemployment was to seek opportunities abroad, and so we had another japa wave. But the sad reality was that not everyone could afford to japa. And so, for the educated people who could not japa and could not fall back on menial jobs, it became a matter of hustling to make it one way or another. The oil boom of the 70s ushered in prosperity for Nigeria, but it also birthed a wave of corruption and anyhowness by those at the top that continues to plague the nation today. Loosely defined within this context, anyhowness is a concept that summarizes the way people do things in a lawless way without considering the consequences. One of Nigeria's military rulers at the time, Yakubu Gowon, famously stated, "Money is not Nigeria's problem, but how to spend it." While the wealthy enjoyed lavish lifestyles that were reserved for British colonial masters only a decade before, most Nigerians lived in deplorable conditions. With wealth piling up at the top and barely trickling down, Nigeria's elites flaunted their riches without restraint, leaving many struggling to make ends meet. In such an environment, the idea that if you want to prosper, you have to cheat began to feel like a harsh truth. Crime and shortcuts started looking like the only way for ordinary people to chase the flashy lives they admired from afar. Before long, Nigeria became a stopover for drug traffickers transporting narcotics from South America to the West, using drug mules who would swallow condoms filled with cocaine. And as if that wasn't enough, armed robberies became as common as traffic jams in Lagos, with people turning to crime just to survive. As the 80s rolled in, Nigeria's oil earnings started to dwindle, and life became much tougher for the average Nigerian. Unemployment soared. Also, those who had left the country were not finding it any easier than their Nigerian counterparts. Here's a documentary of some Nigerians who were stranded in the US.
Who are learning more than they bargained for. A lesson in world economics and small-town American hospitality.
They are Nigerians who came here to study and now find themselves stranded.
What do we do? There's no money. How can you live?
Tony Lott came to the University of Wisconsin-Stout 8 months ago on a Nigerian government scholarship, but his scholarship money has never shown up. Alugabi has been working on his master's degree for 2 years. With just 2 semesters left to go, his money has stopped coming. There are 50 Nigerian students here in the same boat. No funds for tuition, for housing, for food.
Before I left home, it was an understood situation that the government would take care of my stay here. Now, if they said they were not going to take care of my stay, definitely I wouldn't have even, left Nigeria in the first place.
We may be in Menominee, Wisconsin, but this is really a story about the worldwide economic crisis. A story about oil-rich countries like Nigeria and what happens when oil prices drop and the supply of dollars begins to dwindle. The Nigerian government has had to tighten up on its foreign exchange. What that means here is a group of foreign students who can't get money out of their country, so they can't pay their bills.
We're talking about $700,000 for that group of people.
And that's more money than this university can absorb. Nationwide, Nigerian students owe some $87 million in tuition and living expenses to hundreds of colleges. We've tried talking to the Nigerian embassy, Ellen Lanahan says, but every time we call,
someone will say, there isn't any money in the country right now. I don't foresee when there's going to be any money, but don't tell the students.
Still, the university says beginning next week, it will only register those students who have cash up front. That leaves people like Tony Lott and Alugabi with no money to get home, worried about deportation, and wondering about a government which stranded them when all they did was come here to study.
We've touched on how many people left Nigeria during the 60s and 70s, often departing with nothing but dreams and maybe a degree from one of the new Nigerian universities. It's crucial to understand that these universities were hotbeds for social groups, be it fraternities, student unions, or religious associations. Upon graduation, many found themselves united by their shared struggles, which created a tight-knit community, even abroad. For those who ventured overseas, the connection to their roots remained very strong. They often turned to each other for support and communicated with friends back home, pooling resources and sharing information. Many had access to newspapers, libraries, and other local resources that could aid their ambitions. This sense of camaraderie and ambition sometimes led to ethically questionable decisions. One infamous case involved American investment bank Merrill Lynch discovering that some of their nighttime cleaning staff, many of whom were Nigerian, were photocopying customer information and sending it to their friends back home. These individuals, grappling with their own financial hardships, found ways to collaborate with friends in Nigeria, leveraging their access to valuable information and networks to facilitate scams. The Merrill Lynch incident was not an isolated one. It reflected a broader trend among those who face similar economic challenges, where desperation could blur the lines between right and wrong. But let's be clear, not all early migrants from Nigeria to the West were involved in fraud. Many found honest work and built successful lives, proving that the Nigerian prince stereotype is not the full story of early immigration from Nigeria. Alright, so how exactly did the 419 scam play out back in the 70s and the 80s? Strictly for educational purposes, of course. First, you need a list of potential victims, their names, addresses, and fax numbers. Yes, fax machines were the lifeblood of these scams. If you had a contact abroad, this part was a breeze. Next, you craft a story, a juicy one. That's where your education came in handy, and why so many graduates got involved in 419 back then. You had to create a tale so gripping your prospect couldn't resist. Maybe you're pitching a $400 million contract to build the next big bridge in Lagos, or a fancy new refinery in Port Harcourt. Of course, to win the bid, they need to grease some palms with fees, and that's where the infamous advance fee comes in, hence the name advance fee fraud. But it didn't stop there. The scam had to look legit, so you'd head to a place like Oluwole Street, the one-stop shop for all things counterfeit. Signatures, stamps, letterheads, you name it. And then you would adorn the letter with elements of legitimacy. Official seals, government insignias, and meticulously forged documents that could fool even the sharpest eye. You wouldn't sign it with your real name though. Nah, you create a fancy sounding alias like Kuntakinte Oyibogo, Director of Partnerships at NNPC. Then, you'll fire off your letters via fax or courier and wait. Now, you weren't expecting a load of responses, but all you needed was one person to bite and you were golden. You finally had a mugu. Once you had that hook, it was time to reel them in. Fee after ridiculous fee, mobilization fee, document verification fee, company accreditation fee, scam detection fee, anti-bribery fee, stamp fee, contractor settlement fee. Honestly, the sky was the limit on how creative you could get. The mugu would keep paying because hey, what's a few $1,000s when you start to make $400 million? If they got suspicious, no problem. You would invite them to Nigeria, roll out the red carpet, maybe even get them a convoy and put them up in a swanky hotel. You take them to a rented office at the NNPC building, where you bribe someone to get you an office, introduce them to your colleagues, of course your fellow scammers, and make it all seem super official. Here's where it got even more wild. You show them a pile of money, fake cash coated in black. You then clean a small portion of it with some bogus chemical to prove it's real. Then tell the mugu they needed to buy the chemical in large amounts to clean the rest. Obviously, the chemical cost a fortune. Once they returned home, confident in the legitimacy of the whole thing, you continue milking them for fees. Sometimes, this dance would go on for years. The mugu would be so invested in the scam, they wouldn't want to believe they had been had. Stockholm Syndrome, Nigerian style. If the mugu ever caught on, you would hit them with one final twist, posing as the chief of police investigating the scam. And of course, all you needed to proceed is an investigation fee. These scams were never small operations. You weren't working solo, you had a whole squad. Sometimes even a high-profile godfather at the top, greasing palms and pulling strings. It was like a well-oiled machine, bribing police, faking documents, renting faxes, even using costumes. It took a village to pull off these large-scale scams successfully. Back in the 70s and 80s, these stories were believable. Who wouldn't buy into the idea of NNPC looking for a contractor? So, victims didn't even report the scam, mostly out of embarrassment. And even if they did, the authorities didn't take it seriously because these scams weren't super common yet. But as more people started losing serious cash, government had to step in.
Viime aikoina ovat suomalaiset yritykset saaneet tällaisia englanninkielisiä kirjeitä, jotka on postitettu Nigeriasta. Näissä kirjeissä pyydetään yhteistoimintaan ryhtymistä rahavarojen siirtämiseksi Nigeriasta.
As the internet and email started gaining traction in the 90s, so did 419 scams. Fraudsters quickly adapted from the manual days of fax machines and letters to a more digital approach using email. This shift coincided with the boom of cyber cafes in Nigeria, where scammers would set up shop, often working through the night to take advantage of cheaper internet rates, faster connections, and time differences between Nigeria and their preferred targets, usually in the US. This was the era when 419 fraudsters earned the nickname Yahoo boys. thanks to their heavy use of Yahoo email accounts to lure in unsuspecting victims abroad. The scams themselves also evolved. Instead of massive business deals that sounded too good to be true, they shifted to more personal and emotionally driven schemes. Romance scams, for example, became a popular playbook. Targeting lonely people abroad, scammers would build a fake relationship, making their victims fall in love, and then ask for money under the guise of love and support. The internet made this type of scam easier, with faster communication and the ability to maintain constant contact, building trust before striking.
We've checked out Richard Williams' email, and guess what? It's on a blacklist. He's a scammer too. He's not who he says he is, and he certainly doesn't love you as he's professing.
Really? You've actually checked out that email address as...
While we've been talking. Rosalie, please turn the computer off. If you can't see the whites of their eyes and they're not buying you a drink, don't talk to them.
No one buys me a drink. That's the whole problem.
There were also other creative scams during this era. One common trick involved emailing a family member of a deceased person, claiming that their late relative had a significant sum of money locked away. The family member, of course, was entitled to the funds if they could just pay a small fee to unlock it. Even NGOs and charities weren't spared. Scammers would tell them that a generous donor had left a large sum in their will, but to access the donation, they would need to cover a processing fee. Aspiring footballers also fell victim. Grassroots players around the world would get emails from supposed agents of major European clubs, promising a transfer if they could just pay a fee to process the paperwork. Not all scams were targeted abroad though. Many were targeted here in Nigeria, like real estate fraud, which led to the rise of those infamous warnings painted on shoddy-looking properties across Nigeria. This house is not for sale. Beware of 419. The scams were endless, and no matter the type, there always seemed to be someone on the other end ready to fall for it. It's easy to assume that given the illegal nature of their earnings, Yahoo boys would live quietly under the radar. Quite the opposite. These fraudsters flaunted their wealth in the most extravagant ways possible. The younger ones splurged on flashy cars, decked themselves in designer clothes to resemble American hip-hop stars, and draped themselves in expensive jewelry. The older ones, they didn't hold back either, buying even more luxurious cars, building sprawling mansions and hotels, and even earning prestigious chieftaincy titles in their hometowns. Some even made bold moves by running for political office. Among the most notorious high-profile Nigerian fraudsters of this era are Maurice Ibekwe. Maurice Ibekwe completed a number of scams, but the one he is best known for is ripping off a German businessman, Klaus Munch, of over $330,000 between 1993 and 1994. Ibekwe conned Munch under the guise of a fake $30 million contract to supply computers, monitors, and other accessories for the proposed Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja, which hadn't even been built yet. He pulled off the scam by impersonating the Accountant General of the Ministry of Aviation, giving the fraudulent deal a shade of legitimacy. Incredibly, despite this criminal record, Maurice Ibekwe went on to become a member of Nigeria's House of Representatives in 1999 till his death in 2004. Fred Ajudua. Fred Ajudua, dubbed a serial fraudster by Sahara reporters, made headlines in 1993 when he scammed a German widow, Frida Springer Beck, out of over $350,000. Frida, who inherited a small company from her husband after he tragically died in a road accident, was duped into paying this amount in several installments as fees for access to a fictional $24 million investment her husband supposedly made in Nigeria. While Ajudua had a history of scams that landed him in and out of jail, this particular case stands out because Frida refused to back down. She dedicated 12 years to reclaiming her money, even moving to Nigeria to pursue the matter. Thanks to the establishment of the EFCC in 2003 and her collaboration with them, she eventually managed to recover some of her funds. More on the EFCC later. The unholy trinity of scammers: Emmanuel Nwude, Christian Anajemba, and his wife Amaka Anajemba. Together, they pulled off one of the biggest scams in history, the Banco Noreste scam. This operation, which ran from 1995 to 1998, raked in a staggering $242 million. The main victim, Nelson Sakaguchi, who was running the Cayman Islands branch of Brazilian bank Banco Noreste. It all began in March 1995, when Sakaguchi received a fax inviting him to invest in the construction of the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Nigeria's shiny new capital city, Abuja. The fax outlined all the juicy details about the contracts and cleverly stated that Sakaguchi needed to cough up some fees up front for commissions and bribes. Naturally, the letter was signed by a fictional character named Tafida Williams, who claimed to be the Director of Budget and Planning at the Ministry of Aviation. Talk about creative writing. Sakaguchi saw this as the golden opportunity he had been waiting for to make some serious cash for the bank. He kicked off the deal with a trip to London, where his investment partners rolled out the red carpet, taking him from the airport to a fancy restaurant. After a sumptuous meal, Sakaguchi was convinced to pay $35,000 as the first of many fees related to the airport contract. And so began a cascade of transactions, with Sakaguchi wiring countless sums of money to various bank accounts across the globe, all funded with the bank's cash. Fast forward to 1998, Spanish bank Santander was eyeing a buyout of Banco Noreste and decided to perform some due diligence by auditing their accounts with PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC. During their audit, PwC stumbled upon a gaping hole in the bank's finances. They quickly connected the dots back to Sakaguchi, who was soon shown the door and ended up in a jail in Switzerland. Meanwhile, on the other end of this grand scam were our notorious trio, Chris and Amaka Anajemba, along with Emmanuel Nwude. Chris and Amaka used their fortune to play a real-life game of Monopoly, snapping up properties across the globe, all while Chris met an untimely death under suspicious circumstances in 1998. Nwude, not one to sit idly by, became the largest shareholder and a board member of Union Bank, because why not? Banco Noreste wasn't about to let this money vanish without a fight. They teamed up with legal firms and asset recovery experts around the world. This is how they eventually tracked down the Anajembas and Nwude, linking them to the labyrinth of transactions that led to the greatest Nigerian heist of the century. To fully understand the fallout from this colossal scam, we need to talk about the EFCC. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission was established in 2003 under the government of President Olusegun Obasanjo. Its creation was largely a response to mounting pressure from the G7 nations to tackle the rampant money laundering and 419 scams that had become synonymous with Nigeria. In 2001, the G7's money laundering arm, the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, had placed Nigeria on its naughty list of uncooperative countries in the fight against money laundering. Having just transitioned to a democratic government, Nigeria had to show that it was ready to play nice on the global stage, leading to the establishment of EFCC as a gesture of goodwill. At the helm of the EFCC was the no-nonsense Nuhu Ribadu, a man known for his determination and grit. Ribadu and his team wasted no time in going after some of Nigeria's most notorious 419 fraudsters. The high-profile Banco Noreste case was at the top of their list. When the EFCC decided to investigate Anajemba and Nwude in 2003, their first strategy was to offer bribes to the EFCC officials. However, these officials weren't having any of it. They recorded the bribe attempts, which only added to the fraudsters' woes in court. From 2003 to 2006, Anajemba and Nwude faced a 3-year legal battle, culminating in 86 counts of fraud and 15 counts of bribery against them. By the end of it all, a significant portion of the scammed money was recovered. Anajemba was handed a 2.5-year prison sentence, while Nwude received a 5-year sentence. Yet, after all the media frenzy died down, Nwude was released from prison after serving less than a year.
So Google is also telling us that Maurice Beko is a scammer. That he scammed $300 million or $300,000 for a company in Germany or so. So what What do you have to say about that?
Well, what they're saying is come, but in those days, I don't believe that it's true, because in those days, 419 is legalized.
While 419 has always been illegal in Nigeria, the people we just heard from in the interview expressed a common perception. Before the establishment of EFCC, many believed that 419 was almost legal. The police were often ineffective in tracking down 419 operators, leaving victims feeling helpless. Take, for example, Frida Springer Beck, the German woman who was defrauded by Fred Ajudua. She moved to Nigeria in search of her stolen funds, yet she received very little assistance from the police or any other authorities until the EFCC came into the picture. Despite the efforts of the EFCC, the 419 problem continues to plague Nigeria today. Many young people, particularly in rural areas, look up to fraudsters as the pillars of their communities and the only role models worth emulating. This admiration is often amplified by music stars, many of whom are allegedly funded by these fraudsters, singing songs that glorify 419 and praise fraudulent lifestyles. In the 90s, popular Fuji singer K1 The Ultimate released a number of tracks that celebrated the 419 kingpins we've discussed in this video. Moving into the early 2000s, club anthems like Yahoo emerged, highlighting the hustle of working on computers from Monday to Friday and then splurging cash over the weekend on expensive drinks and flashy cars like Hummer Jeeps. Another notable hit was the street anthem, Maga Don't Pay, which became so popular that shouting its title on the street would most likely elicit a joyful shout hallelujah from a passerby. The song celebrated the thrill of finally receiving money from a client or a maga and giving thanks to God for it. Over the years, countless songs have continued this trend, but more recently, tracks like Cash App have surfaced, detailing the process of scamming clients using the popular finance app, Cash App. These are hits from A-list stars, and in the streets of Nigeria, songs of this nature are so prevalent that listeners often become desensitized to the lyrics, choosing instead to dance to the catchy beats. The fashion trend among young people are heavily influenced by these music videos, showcasing the artists dressed in designer clothes and flashy jewelry, further glamorizing the lifestyles associated with fraud. Just as advance fee scams emerged from the exploitation of penny black postage stamps in the early 1800s, today's fraudsters have capitalized on the rapid technological advancements of the 21st century to develop new methods for scamming victims. In the current landscape, scammers leverage social media, cryptocurrency platforms, deepfake technology, credit card fraud, online advertisements, gaming platforms, and any new medium where they can identify a loophole. Some even resort to using juju or black magic to enhance their scams, a practice known as Yahoo+. However, it doesn't stop at rituals. Yahoo+ has also been linked to horrifying acts like organ harvesting, and some scammers resort to extreme measures in their pursuit of wealth and supposed spiritual fortification. While some high-profile fraudsters like Hush Puppy live lavish lifestyles and flaunt their wealth on social media, there are also those who adopt a more discreet approach. These white-collar fraudsters often operate seemingly legitimate businesses while running their fraudulent schemes underground. A notable example is Invictus Obi, an entrepreneur who made the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2016 but was arrested 5 years later in 2021 for masterminding scams that totaled over $11 million. As Nigerian fraudsters have honed and perfected the art of 419 over the decades, Nigeria has garnered a tarnished reputation in the international community, often regarded as the 419 capital of the world, almost reaching pariah status. When international businessmen consider ventures in Nigeria, their embassies caution them about the inherent dangers. Consequently, many foreigners are hesitant to do business with or employ Nigerians for fear of falling victim to scams. Payment platforms like PayPal, a global fintech giant, have restricted Nigerians from receiving transfers, primarily due to the pervasive 419 problem. Additionally, global fintech companies are reluctant to operate in Nigeria, knowing that local fraudsters can easily exploit loopholes to defraud users. For young Nigerian men like myself, even securing a tourist visa to Western nations has become very difficult, often requiring extensive documentation to prove their legitimacy, and even then, many still face rejection. The stark truth is that while a handful may find fleeting wealth through deceit, the pervasive stain of 419 fraud continues to cast a long shadow over Nigeria. As long as these scams persist, the nation will grapple with the consequences: lost opportunities, international stigma, and a society increasingly divided between the allure of quick riches and the value of hard-earned integrity. In the end, the real cost of 419 isn't just measured in stolen funds, but in the fractured trusts that takes generations to rebuild.